Calling out Dennis O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to respond to some of the speeches made by the members opposite with regard to Section 18 and especially the question of independence when it comes to choosing topics under that section. And in doing so, I would have 5 questions which I think the people of New Zealand, some of whom may be watching this debate, should ask themselves in relation to that section. And the first one is, why should it just be 2 ministers who should choose those topics, when clearly much better options exist? And I think that's a question which those members in the opposite benches have not properly answered, and which I haven't heard answered yet. Fundamentally, there are 2 alternatives which have been put forward, both of which seem to me to be better. One is the one which is proposed by Eugenie Sage, which would be for the Secretary and the Government Statistician to jointly make those decisions. And if that was the case, we could then guarantee independence and transparency. Alternatively, there could actually be a schedule to the Act, which would then have to be changed every 3 years, and that wouldn't be a bad thing because it would involve the whole of Parliament in doing that, and after all, every 3 years is not so frequent that it would be impracticable. I think both of those would be superior to what is provided here. And the second question I would ask is, why do those members opposite feel that the regime set out in Section 18 is indeed a robust one? And that's a word that they have used, and I've heard several of them use. Because when you look at Section 18.2 in particular, you see that the language used is, for example, in A, that the minister must be satisfied that significant areas and resources or number of people are involved, topics measured with robust statistical measures, and so on. So it comes down to the personal opinion of the minister whether those ministers are satisfied with those things. Now, how do we know? What will be the backup information provided so the rest of us can tell whether the conclusions reached by the 2 ministers are reasonable in respect of those issues? There is a complete silence as far as those matters are concerned. And some ministers, and I particularly remember Minister Smith, commenting that, don't worry, it's all okay because we have in Section 18.3 a provision for consultation, as though somehow that was a substitute for independent decision making. Well, consultation isn't decision making at all. It is simply an obligation to hear and to take into account the views of others. Nothing wrong with that. But it is not, in fact, decision-making, and it makes no genuine contribution to the requirement that many of us are concerned about, which is genuine, independent decision-making. So I say to those members opposite, and especially to Minister Smith, he has failed totally to convince me that consultation is in any way a substitute for independent decision-making, and I think the people in the public listening to this debate today would understand exactly what I mean. And the fourth question relates to one particular issue which I haven't heard members opposite speak about at all, and that is the point that this regime talks about which topics ministers may choose. But they haven't talked about the fact that under this regime, the ministers could actually decide to report not at all on some topics, and would have no responsibility to discuss them, have no responsibility to tell people anything about them, and we would never know. And that's not good enough. And I think that is one of the most dangerous parts of Section 18 in this whole regime, would be for ministers to simply decide there is a topic here that we don't want discussed in public, we don't want to be reported on, so we'll make sure that it doesn't happen. And Mr. Speaker, I think that's one of the, Mr. Chairman, I think that's one of the big defects in this. And the final, Mr Chairman, the final
I call
question.
Stuart Nash.
Mr Chair, this